Hello folks, welcome to the channel Jose. Today we're going to give you an idea how we take off the oil pump on this 91 to 94 Toyota Tercel. And the process is going to be just taking off the timing belt and all that, so we can get the oil pump out, so we can replace the seals and put a new seals on it. So today is just taking off and put it back on the oil pump. And with that said, so that way you get an idea of what the mechanic is gonna do, or what you have to do when you're doing an oil pump replacement on a 91 to 94 Toyota Tercel. And with that said, let's get started. So the first thing that we have done is we have lifted our car and we have set it on jack stands, and we have taken the passenger side tire off, so we can actually access where the crankshaft and all the bottom pieces are, so we can work on the bottom and through the top. That's why we have to lift it, and we lifted a little bit more on the passenger side, so we have more clearance to work with the equipment on that side. So with that, let's get started now. So to replace the oil pump seal or gasket, what we have to do is we have to remove the belt from the alternator. And if your car has a power steering and AC, they will be on this area, so you will have to clear that out a little bit, or at least take the belts off, so you can start taking the crankshaft pulley off, because we have to take this plastic cover off and the bottom plastic cover off, which is covering the timing belt. And then, but to get to that, we have to remove all the belts, take the crankshaft pulley off by removing that bolt right there, and then we can pull the pulley out, but we have to remove the belt first. And for me to remove the belt, or if you got more belts than just the alternator, I'm going to remove this sensor bracket, which is that bolt, the 12 millimeter, so I can move it around and I can loosen the alternator, so I can take the belt off, so then I can start working on the covers of the plastics and move them out of the way once I remove the crankshaft as well, the crankshaft pulley. But belt, crankshaft pulley, plastic covers. With that, let's get started taking that belt off. So now that we have removed these structure, what we want to expose is that there's a bolt right here that is a 12 millimeter bolted down to the alternator, and we want to loosen that so we can slide it back and forth, as you can see on the groove, so we can slide it towards the front of the car, so we can loosen the tension on the belt, so then we can take it off from the crankshaft pulley. And that also drives the water pump on the on this engine. So there's another bolt in the bottom that we can loosen, because it's the main bolt in the bottom, and this is just for the tensioner. So you don't want to tighten these too much, because that's into the aluminum casing of the alternator. So we loosen that at 12 millimeters, so we can take that tension off of the belt. So now, as you can see, we have removed the tension on the belt, so we can take it off the pulley on the crankshaft, and start taking out the crankshaft pulley off, so then we can start removing all these plastic covers. So now we have to remove this 90 millimeter bolt that holds a crankshaft pulley into the crankshaft, and that's a 90 millimeter, so we use an impact gun. So now that we have taken the main bolt on the crankshaft pulley, we have to extract that pulley, and that way we can start taking the plastic covers off of the timing belt. So we take that pulley off. So now, to remove the timing belt covers, what we have to do is we have to lift the valve cover a little bit off. We're going to have to loosen the nuts that hold down the valve cover, and then we have to remove this cover right here. 1, 2, 3, 4 bolts, 10 millimeters, and then we can start going down to the other timing belt cover, because what's going on is the timing belt is the one that drives the oil pump, and that's how we have to remove the timing belt, so we can expose the oil pump. So we start from the top down. So we're exposing some of the steps so you don't get lost. So we loosen this one and this one, 12 millimeters, so we can lift a little bit, so we can, this one falls right on top of this plastic, so we can able to extract it once we take him off from here. So we loosen those two 12 millimeters. So now we remove 1, 2, 3, 4 10mm bolts so we can remove this cover and go down to the other one. So now we're taking that top timing belt cover off, so now we can continue on the bottom one, so we can expose where the timing belt goes over the oil pump, and we can start taking the timing belt off and getting ready for taking that oil pump off. So the bottom timing belt cover has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bolts holding that bottom timing belt, but some of the tabs are broken off that we're going to replace it so we can have a fresh one. So we have removed it. Now we got the timing belt exposed. So what we do when we're just messing on the bottom end of the timing belt and we don't mess with the top, what we do is we just put zip ties, 2 of them, so it holds a timing against the pulley on the top, and that way we mess with the bottom, and that way we don't lose track where it was on the top, and that way when we start putting back the bottom piece, the top stays untouched. So we put some zip ties to keep the timing belt from coming off of that top gear of the camshaft. So that's a good tip you should do. Just instead of marking it, just put zip ties and hold it against the pulley. So we do that now. So now we have put the zip ties and secured the belt against the pulley. So now we know we put them on red color, so that way we don't forget them in case we cut them. That way we know that the zip ties are there, so we can see them. So now we got control on the top. So now we have to mark in the bottom before we take it off. So when we put everything back, everything's on the bottom line up, and the top never got moved. So now what we're going to be doing is we're going to mark in the bottom the time belt against a tooth, so we keep track where that tooth is going to fall in when we put it back on. When we loosen the tension, we know that if it comes off, that the tooth has to match that gear. So then once we do that, we take the tension off of the tensioner, we loosen it, so we can start taking the timing belt off, and we can start taking the oil pump off. So what we're going to be doing to mark or put to mark down there, we're going to be using whiteout, because this, once it dries out, is hard to come off. So we don't wipe it off as easy as a marker or a Sharpie. So we can put a good mark and know where this, once it dries, where the belt is going to have to fall in. So we're going to show you how we use this for this scenario. So now we remove this guide that keeps the timing belt from sliding out from the pulley. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to wipe and clean with something that takes the grease off, so we can mark it with the whiteout. And we're going to make a mark where one tooth falls into the gear, so that way when we take all this off, once it's dry, when we put it back on, that has to match the gear, so that way we know that we're on timing on the bottom. So we're going to have to remove this, but we mark it. So now that we have marked it with a whiteout, we let it dry, so that way that's going to be a very important mark for us to put it back on timing. That's going to help us and guide us that this timing belt has to fall right in there, so everything's on timing and all the gears are matching just when it came out, so we don't lose timing. So we don't have to put it to dead zero or that piston up and all that, so we just match this and that's it. So now that we're ready to remove the tension of the timing belt, we gotta loosen this bolt. It's a 12mm. This is just the idler pulley or bearing. This is the tensioner, so we gotta take and just loosen this bolt off so we can start moving the tensioning back and forth. We still got the mark right in the timing belt in the crankshaft pulley, so it has to go back in the same mark once we put it back on here, because up in the camshaft it has zip ties, so it will move. So this is where it needs to sit right when we put the tension on this side, so that's where it needs to go back at. So now we can take the timing belt off, and then we can start taking the oil pump off. So now we can remove the crankshaft pulley out, and then we're gonna have to remove the bolts that hold the oil pump against the block. And there's two bolts, one right here and one right here, that screw onto the oil pump. So we have to take those off because that's from the oil pan. So this one and these two bolts and the bolts that hold the pump on the side. One thing you want to be careful is don't take the oil pump off before taking the spring off. This is the tensioner spring, so if you don't take this spring off, the oil pump is going to be attached to that. So take that spring off. Now that we have taken all the bolts off, we can start spreading it and getting it away from the block. So here's the O-ring that was here sealing the oil pump. So now we're gonna put this new, and then we're gonna put the oil pump back in with the new gasket. So now we can start cleaning around before we put everything back on. So we gotta make sure it's clean and there's no gaskets or silicone or any of that. So this is the oil pump outside. This is the crankshaft seal. There's a seal for this pulley when it crosses to the internal of the oil pump, and it's right between, right in there. And there's this O-ring that we're gonna replace as well. This that has dried out, and there's some silicone that we have to add here for the oil to be sealed in the block and the oil pan.